There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Michael by there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. I want to wish everyone a happy 4th of July weekend. For those across the pond, that's our Independence Day, 1776, and July 4th is when we celebrate the freedom that we have in this country. So, guys, in the Brian Kohberger case, there's been so many legal things going on. The defense is trying to get so many different documents, and we know that when they are trying to get documents from the prosecution, that's called discovery material, and the prosecution is required to give all of the evidence to the defense, and that includes exculpatory and inculpatory evidence. Two big words I learned in criminal justice. Exculpatory and inculpatory evidence, and they must turn it over before the start of the trial. There is where there's a lot of gray area. The defense, of course, is screaming for all of the evidence immediately, but guess what? They're not entitled to it immediately. It says in the Idaho criminal procedure law that the prosecution must turn over all discovery material before the start of the trial, which in this case is October 2nd. So even though everyone's been yelling about, oh, this is unfair, that's unfair, it's not unfair. It's the strategy also that the prosecution uses. Let's not forget, the prosecution has to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And what the defense's goal is to poke holes in their case through creating doubt. If they can get one juror to doubt that they have the wrong person or they don't have enough evidence for conviction, that's all it takes in our system, right? So what has the defense been railing about? Well, they were talking about challenging the grand jury indictment. And we have a famous saying here in New York that a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich. And the truth is, to get an indictment, it's really one of the lowest forms to get what's called a true bill. It's just probable cause, really, that a crime's been committed, and this grand jury in secret votes yay or nay, whether there's enough evidence to proceed with the case. And they did vote to proceed. Now, at this stage, is the defense going to be able to challenge the grand jury? And in essence, will they waste their time doing this? I feel it's a waste of time because I think it's a by the books indictment. And the defense should be working on other areas of this case than challenging. To me, it seems like a stall. And many other people may also think that. What we're looking at, what are they going to challenge in this case? And obviously, one of the biggest pieces of evidence that we've discussed and all the talking heads on TV have discussed, people with much bigger salaries than me, talking about what they're going to challenge. And everyone agrees what they're going to challenge is the DNA evidence and how they got the DNA, how they arrived at the DNA evidence. How did that produce probable cause? And how was it obtained? How was it processed? Is it contaminated? Could touch DNA that was left on that sheath, could that have been put there a long time ago and somehow miraculously this sheath wound its way underneath the body and the comforter in the bed next to Madison Mogen? Is that a possibility? So the defense is going to try to prove or to raise doubt as to how that got there, how that sheath got there. with Brian Kohberger's DNA on it. How did that possibly get there? Because he's innocent, you know. And then we use the term that's used in a lot of children's books called connect the dots, right? Connect the dots. And what do we mean by that? When we say connect the dots, what we mean is, how about the other evidence? How about the cell site information? How about the video of that white Hyundai Elantra pulling into 1122 King Road, into the back lot, and driving around, being caught on several cameras? How about that same white Elantra being caught by a cell site information on at least 12 other occasions, reconning 1122 King Road? You can argue that. You can say, oh, he's just driving around, he's delivering pizzas, whatever you want to say, whatever the defense wants to say. But these are some of the dots that we connect in law enforcement to not just one piece of evidence. Say the sheath was the only piece of evidence they had. Say, for argument's sake, say the judge throws that sheath out and says, I don't like the way this was processed. Fruits of the poisonous tree, I'm excluding this evidence. Could the prosecution still get a conviction in this case? Could they? My thoughts are, yes, they could. There's other evidence, and we'll connect the dots. And to aid me in my dissertation tonight and my sort of connecting the dots, I have with me retired NYPD Sergeant, Professor, law degree, always I call him the man of reason, Professor Mike Geary. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, Billy. Good evening. Thank you for having me on.
Well, Mike, you always come through. I notify you with almost no time, and you're like, I'm on the highway. I'll be at home in any minute.
No
and
problem.
He shows up. So everyone give him a round of applause. We'll hear it from all over the world. You guys clapping for Professor Mike. But, Mike, it seems that the defense is we can predict where they're going. And one of the places they're going, and I stated earlier, how about other DNA that's found inside that house? 1122 King Road.
Yeah,
What
Billy,
will that mean?
Yeah, they're going to say that it means that there are possibly a number of people who may have been involved in the homicide, not, the suspect. No, it's going to be somebody else, some unknown male DNA. We discussed this on the previous show. It would be really strange if, they went to the police went to that crime scene and they found no DNA that was unidentified, that they knew exactly, precisely whose DNA it is. If you go to my house, you go to anyone's house, even a viewer, and you start processing that house as a crime scene, there's going to be a fingerprint that might be left over from a neighbor from a couple of days ago. But if the neighbor had never been fingerprinted for any reason, that would be an unknown fingerprint. If there was DNA from fingertips or something like that, this exact same thing. It would be shocking if there's a home in the United States where every single strand of hair, every single bit of DNA, every single fingerprint can be identified like that. No, that's not it. But that's not going to happen. But the defense attorney is going to run with whatever they got. They're just going to try to create doubt. Remember, that's all they're trying to do. Create doubt in the minds of the jury. Is it possible that it wasn't Brian Kohberger, that it was several other males who've never been identified and whose DNA is right there at the crime scene and nobody knows who it is? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that's reasonable doubt. That's what they're going to do. That's what they're trying to do. That's their legal obligation to do the best interest, do what they can do in the best interest of their client, zealously advocate for them. That's fine. And you expect that.
Mike, I want to tell a quick NYPD story. There was this real violent rapist who, I won't tell the whole story, but long story short, he raped this girl. Practically, he murdered her. He tended to murder her, but he fled out the building. A detective from Manhattan Special Victims, who was, I think, one of the greatest detectives. At the time, he was the most experienced special victims detective in the nation. His name was John Savino, and he was a first-grade detective. When he went into the crime scene, he looked in the ashtray and there were 6 cigarette butts in there. And thinking ahead to a potential trial, he tested every single one of those cigarettes for DNA, the cigarette butts. But before he did that, he took DNA swabs from every single person that responded to the scene. And it was night watch detectives, EMS, and he took DNA swabs from all of them. And he identified one of the cigarettes in the ashtray as belonging to a detective from Night Watch, which was, crime scene 101. You don't ever leave something in the crime scene, especially if you're an investigator. Or cardinal sin number 2 was, back in the day when there were no cell phones, don't ever use the phone in a crime scene.
That's right.
I've seen both of those things violated. But what was Savino's thoughts at that time? He was thinking ahead to a trial that the defense attorney would say, do you know who all those cigarette butts to? Did you test all of them? And he could say, yes, I did. And this is who they belong to. Smart detective, excellent detective. So that's what the defense is looking to do here. And specifically, I'm thinking of a glove that actually a content creator on YouTube spotted it and pointed it out to one of the investigators on the scene. I would imagine they invoiced the glove and they tested it for DNA. I mean, they got to live with that now too, and they also have to live with other DNA that is that they lifted from that scene. Gracie, thank you so much for the $10 super sticker. Very much appreciated. Also, Charisma, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for the support. We really appreciate you guys taking care of police off the cuff. So those things, excellent detective work on the part of Detective Savino. Oh, a footnote to that. That case was featured on America's Most Wanted. And you guys could look it up. The perp's name was Stephen Peppuccino. I still remember it. You know why? Because myself and 5 detectives grabbed him in Queens inside a bar. And it was very satisfying to grab this guy.
Darn right.
And he didn't take it to trial because he was a career criminal. He would have, so I think he got 25 to life for it. But again, that's just a little story. People love these NYPD stories. So that's what the defense is looking to do. What other DNA was on the scene? What other evidence? What other fiber evidence? Did you check? And they're going to point fingers at the investigators. Someone in the chat earlier on said, oh, there's 2 corrupt cops on the Moscow, Idaho police force. And that's why the Brady Giglio ruling came. Look, I'm not concerned with that. I'm concerned with a guy who slaughtered 4 people while they were in their beds. If these cops are corrupt, they'll have their day in court. But has nothing to do with this case. Will the defense use that to impeach their credibility? Yeah, let them go ahead. Let them go ahead and do it. But you know something? They did the same thing in the O.J. Simpson case. And was there some bad police work done in the O.J. Simpson case? You bet. You bet there was. But you know something? They're not on trial. But although the defense will try to make it seem like they're on trial.
That's, the best defense is a good offense in any, in any endeavor in life. You go after the people, that you can go after, look for a chink in the armor. As they used to say in law school, if you have the facts on your side, you argue the facts. If you have the law, the written law on your side, argue the written law. If you don't have the facts nor the law, you pound the table, make a lot of noise, and call the other guy a scoundrel. And that's what they do. That's it. That's criminal defense attorney 101. And that's what you do. You throw up a lot of hay. You never know what sticks. You got to do it because, they have to zealously advocate for Kohberger, and the prosecutor knows they'll challenge the constitution of the grand jury. They'll challenge the DNA evidence. They'll challenge they'll challenge the admissibility of the evidence. They'll challenge the technology used with the DNA evidence, with the genealogical evidence. Everything will be challenged. They won't let any stone go unturned in their attempt to try to zealously advocate for Kohberger. Let them go at it. That's fine. That's their job. more power to them. If they were my defense attorney, that's what I would want them to do. But I think everybody should realize that just because the defense attorney says something is true doesn't always mean it is true. As I said at one point, there's still no connection between Kohberger and the homicides, even in light of the DNA evidence. And I'm like, wow, okay, all right, if you believe that, that's perfectly fine. You're a defense attorney. I expect that. Go for it. But yeah, they got to do what they got to do. They got to try anything and everything, and you just hope that the jury, like any jury, would just use their common sense.
Absolutely. Mike, I'm going to play a little bit of this from court TV because I actually found someone on TV that really agrees with us, and I was a little shocked.
Of this hour in the state of Idaho, where Bryan Kohberger's defense team is pushing back and pushing back hard, let me tell you, against DNA evidence that allegedly places him at the scene of that quadruple homicide. Now, the state of Idaho has revealed through court documents that Bryan Kohberger is a statistical match to DNA recovered from the knife sheath found at the scene of the crime, saying in part, quote, "We already knew that Kohberger's father was linked to the knife sheath. The FBI further compared DNA from the sheath to a cheek swab of the defendant and determined it was a match." Now, Kohberger's attorneys are responding to the claims, accusing the state of Idaho of hiding its entire case. And there's more. And they're rejecting the notion that they are expected to just accept at face value that the sheath contained touch DNA belonging to Bryan Kohberger. So the defense team goes on to say, quote, "There's no connection between Mr. Kohberger and the victims. There is no explanation for the total lack of DNA evidence from the victims in Mr. Kohberger's apartment, in his office, in his home, or his vehicle." There's no doubt this knife sheath is going to play a pivotal role, my courty friends, when this case goes to trial. The Gonsalves family attorney, Shannon Gray, who you've seen on court TV before, spoke about this previously. He talked to us about the importance of the knife sheath to this entire case. Take a listen to what he said.
That was a pretty lengthy probable cause affidavit. It's one of the lengthiest ones I've ever seen. But I think they were very, they wanted to provide as much information as they could to establish probable cause in it. It laid out a little bit of the state's case, how they might proceed on the case at trial. But there's a lot of still other circumstantial evidence that will be gathered between now and the trial date. You still have 3 other crime scenes. You have his apartment, you have the car, you have his parents' house that all need to be processed for evidence of the crime, and then any other evidence that comes in between now and then. But the probable cause, I thought that, it was well done. I think the biggest piece of evidence that jumps out to you is the DNA evidence on the sheet. I think that's the one piece of evidence that will be hard to explain as a defense attorney on the case. So I think that's the biggest piece of evidence.
Mike, I want to play devil's advocate here and ask you, okay. Say, and this is just, again, devil's advocate, right. Say the judge threw that out, said, "I'm throwing out the knife sheath." Could they still get a conviction?
99.99999% chance that the judge would never ever do that. But if the judge did, you could still get a conviction if the jury believes, based on all the evidence they had. They've got the Hyundai Elantra videos. They've got the cell tower pinging. They got the doorbell pictures of him in the area. If they've got his DNA under their fingernails, like the victims, that we don't know if they do or not. They've got a lot of other really good evidence. So I don't think people need to worry that even if that did happen, and say it did, that they wouldn't go ahead with the case. They'd go ahead with the case and they probably would still get a conviction.
Yeah, I believe, one of the things I believe is that there's a lot more evidence, again, that we haven't seen. Everyone's closing the door saying, there's no DNA of the victims on we don't know that yet.
That's right.
The defense is saying that already, and so is all the people in the press. But we actually, guess what? What we say at the beginning of the show all the time is that the discovery will all be hand it in before October 2nd. Guess what? What's today's date? It's July 2nd, right?
That's right.
And that's what the criminal procedure law says in Idaho, is that all discovery must be submitted before the start of the trial. That's what it says in Idaho criminal procedure law. So why is everyone jumping the gun and saying, oh, there's no wait a minute, they didn't hand all the evidence in yet. Why are they saying that, Mike?
I think people want to believe that there is some sort of behind the scenes drama going on, as if this case is like a Law and Order episode where there's always twists and turns and things don't seem as they are, and there's always backroom deals being made, and the killer isn't who you think it is, because the last 5 minutes you find out that, oh, it's somebody different. I think people just love that sort of intrigue. And as you know, as well as I do, and Phil, you know, that's not how these things play out. They play out in a common sense manner. You know, so the idea that people want to really believe in their minds that there's something, you know, that's dramatic that's going to happen. No, I'm sorry. Hate to bore people, but the answer is no. Nothing dramatic is going to happen with this Kohberger case. He's going to go to trial, or he's going to take a plea. You know, the evidence is going to be turned over, as in millions and millions of other cases throughout the country, right on time. They're going to pick a jury if they go to trial. You know, it's going to be a well publicized, well attended case, and people are going to be picking over it, like the OJ case and like the Murdaugh case. But it's a case nonetheless. So I don't think this idea of this intrigue, and people, I think, would just love to think that this is something akin to a TV show. It's not.
Well, you know, Mike, no one tries to create more doubt, I think. And of course, you discount all of it. Then the press.
Yeah.
You know, the press, and also even worse, a lot of these content creators on YouTube. Oh, that house is a drug house. This is a Colombian cartel hit. Like,
oh, I love that one. Yeah.
Stop. Will you stop? You know, it's like, and someone right before the show is saying, oh, the Brady Giglio issue of these two corrupt has nothing to do with this. If they're corrupt, they'll be found out and they'll go on trial, but they have nothing to do with what happened in this case. Oh, they're going to point that they processed some of the evidence and they can't be trusted. So the judge is going to say that's the fruits of the poisonous tree? Let's take one thing at a time. And the one thing at a time we're taking is the butchering and the murder of 4 students from the University of Idaho. You know, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, and someone says I say Zayna wrong. Zayna Kernodle. So that's the 4 students. And that's what this case is about. Not 2 allegedly corrupt cops, not a Colombian cartel hit, because there's no
this is not
other than someone inventing that, you know. And all of the other DNA that's in that house, you show me anyone's house in this country, in this world, that doesn't have other DNA in their house than the occupants that live there.
Exactly.
I mean, and touch DNA, look, that's where they're going to also go after it, is that touch DNA can last a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But still, then how did the sheath belonging to the person arrested with his DNA on it get in the bed with the deceased, one of the deceased students that, you know, that was murdered? How to explain that? And I mean, if they can explain that, you know, the American Bar Association should give them an award, you know?
Right. You know, people, it's like, people should just think about it. You know, the sheath got there. It wasn't anything special. He obviously took the knife out of the sheath and he attacked. I think Kaylee Gonzalez might have been the first person, perhaps, not sure exactly who was first, but he got, I hate to say, I don't mean to sound callous, but he got busy. He got distracted, and he probably dropped the sheath and started attacking people, and then moved from that room to another room, had to go down a staircase, attacked Ethan, who was the next person. And so then he left. He probably had so much adrenaline pumping. He had tunnel vision. He just completely forgot about it. So there's an absolute normal, common sense reason why he forgot the sheath. It wasn't planted by some Colombia drug hitman who flew in with helicopters and they killed 4 innocent people like ninjas and helicoptered out of there and left Brian Kohberger's DNA there. No, no, no. You know, there's a common sense explanation. What's the most common sense, realistic explanation? That's it.
Absolutely. You know, as we look on the screen, this is the timeline. And of course, it says Kohberger's alleged travels on the day of Moscow murders. And the murders occurred between 3:29 and 4:20 a.m. The Hyundai Elantra makes 3 initial passes by 1122 King Road residents, leaving via Walenta Drive. It returns a 4th time at 4:04 a.m. First driving eastbound on King Road, it leaves the area at 4:20 a.m., traveling at a high rate of speed. At 4:48 a.m., the cell phone comes back online and pings at Blaine near U.S. Highway 95. Between 4:50 and 5:27 a.m., the cell phone pings near Genesee, the Union Town. And finally, as Pullman, between 5:25 a.m. and 5:27 a.m., the white sedan is recorded by 5 cameras in Pullman and on the WSU campus. I would say, of course, between 4:48 and 5:27 is when Brian Kohberger, if you believe he is the murderer in this case, that he got rid of that knife. He had plenty of time to do it.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly, he's not going to keep that. He's going to try to get rid of it, and that was the time frame where he did get rid of it. And the other interesting thing, of course, is when we look at the timeline, that he came back to Moscow at between 9 and 9:21 a.m. The cell phone shows that it leaves Kohberger's Pullman residence and travels to Moscow between 9:12 a.m. and 9:21 a.m. It connects with cellular resources that provide coverage to the area where the King Road residence is located. I mean, again, does that prove he did it? No, but when you connect the dots to all of the different evidence that they have, that's very, very strong evidence. Now connect that to the 12 times he reconned 1122 King Road. Connect that. What is the reason he reconned 1122 King Road way before this, obviously?
Exactly, Billy. It's like, as we talk about circumstantial evidence, you just keep building upon and circumstantial evidence. All it is evidence that asks the jury to make a logical connect the dot connection. That's all it is. And it's very strong. And so you connect, you have all of these little strings of circumstantial evidence, and that's how you build a case. People don't, I don't think a lot of people realize that most cases that are brought, in a criminal court are circumstantial evidence cases, unless the person confesses or there's an actual witness to the crime, or the defendant makes an incriminating statement in some way. Everything, DNA evidence, cell phone tower evidence, security camera pictures, that is all circumstantial evidence. It is very strong circumstantial evidence. Put it all together and you just ask a jury to use their common sense. That timeline is fantastic because you could see he goes back to the 1122 residence between 9:20, 9:21, and then he doesn't stick around very long. By 9:45 or 9:48, he's back in his apartment in Washington, in Pullman, Washington. You just add this all up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different things, 8 different things, and it adds up to an excellent circumstantial case.
Mike, like in the Murdoch case, what really solved the Murdoch case and made it the slam dunk for the prosecution was the digital evidence.
Right.
The digital evidence, which was so strong, and specifically that video that his son made that showed that he couldn't even lie anymore, that he wasn't there at the time that the murders occurred, because he didn't know that they had that. And he had been interviewed, 6 months, 8 months before,
right.
Didn't find out they had that till the discovery process. Then he had to completely change his story. So the digital evidence in this case, and of course, there's also computer evidence that we don't even know about because, again, It has not been released by the prosecution. And of course, there's more forensic evidence, I believe, biological evidence, other evidence that they have not yet released. It all remains to be seen. But you know something, you can't just sit back and wait while people are just making up stories. You have to address these alleged stories that people are making up both in the press, people are making up on social media, and the defense, of course, already trying to poke holes in evidence before they even go to trial, before they even take this case to trial, because there's also a trial in the public opinion, although I don't see why that's that important. However, people may argue, well, because we can't get a fair jury in Moscow, Idaho, or maybe anywhere in Idaho, they feel that way. But guess what? The trial could get a change of venue, but trial is going to take place in Idaho, wherever they decide it's going to be.
Yeah, Billy, without a doubt, under the Constitution, that's where it's going to be, in Idaho. And under the Constitution, that's where the grand jury is composed of people from the community wherein as they say, the Fifth Amendment, the district wherein the crime had been occurred. All of this is laid out in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. We also talk about the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution. It's all laid out there. It's been this way for just a little over 200 years, and I think people need to try to not think of this as some sort of creative story, Law and Order kind of thing, because then, and they start listening to all kinds of stuff that's on the internet, because it kind of diminishes people's confidence in how the criminal justice system works. Yeah, it's not the greatest criminal justice system in the world, but when you show me something that works better, maybe I'll believe in it. But this is the best we got. It's good. It works, and we should trust in it, and we should trust the science. If you don't like the personalities involved, you don't like the way the prosecutor talks, or you love the way the defense attorney talks, just use your common sense and realize these people have been doing their jobs for many years. The prosecutor is doing their job, and the defense attorney is doing their job, and they're both trying to get a little bit of play a little bit of public relations to try to get people to understand what their side is saying. Mostly it's the defense attorney doing it, but the prosecutor will do it a little bit too. But they have stricter guidelines when it comes to commenting on the guilt or innocence of cases. We saw how detrimental that was in the Duke lacrosse case with Michael Nifong, the DA, who ended up getting himself disbarred. That was a horror show. Yeah, the prosecutors could play the game as much as the defense attorneys, but they really can't because of their ethical obligations. So when you don't hear something from the prosecutor, the people shouldn't think and say, oh my God, they're hiding something. No, the prosecutor has a different set of ethical obligations than the defense attorney. And so,
Mike, that goes right into this question by Okie Dokie 7. And
Okay.
I'm glad he asked it, because you raised the Duke lacrosse case. And that was a perfect example of the prosecution not turning over exculpatory evidence. And as a result, the district attorney wound up in jail.
Yeah.
I believe he did 6 months and got disbarred. Yeah. So the question is, Professor Geary, have you ever seen the prosecution ever bring any exculpatory evidence of the slightest even? Curious.
Sure. Oh, sure. One of the most famous cases is the Scott Peterson case, and the Scott and Lacey Peterson case out in California. They did the police did a sweep of the area, knocking on everybody's house, because they had to try to prove that her part of her body washed up in San Francisco Bay, and so there wasn't much left. And unfortunately, I don't mean to be graphic, but the prosecution had to prove that she wasn't suicide. She wasn't, it wasn't an accident, that sort of thing. And they had a very tough time trying to do that, but they did successfully. But during the canvass of the neighborhood, they were asking people, did you see anything unusual? Any unusual people in the area that you hadn't seen before? Any suspicious activity? And everyone said no. They lived like in a quiet cul-de-sac community, really very quiet. one person said, yeah, I saw a van here around that time that she went supposedly missing. Yeah, there was a couple of guys. Yeah, and they seemed kind of strange. I was a little worried about that. And so one person out of like 100 said they saw something suspicious. The prosecutor had to turn that over to the defense attorney. And the defense attorney, stomped on the ground, made a lot of hay over it because that was exculpatory. And if you're a prosecutor, you don't have a problem turning over that information because you have to. You have to. So it's part of the job. And remember, prosecutors, if they're a career prosecutor, they have many cases that they've prosecuted. This might be the prosecutor in Idaho's most famous case, perhaps, that he'll ever have handled. But it's the same sort of thing. You get in the evidence, you analyze it, you transfer it over to the defense attorney. When it comes in, you get it, you transfer over to the defense attorney. You don't have the ability to, I'm going to take that report out. That witness statement, I'm going to pull that one out. I can't say that it was never happened in the past, 200 years of our criminal justice system, but it's such a routine thing to do. It just becomes second nature. Great question.
Mike, I just want to also say there are unscrupulous prosecutors that don't turn over discovery. But I think most prosecutors, they do swear to an oath that they will, that's the rules. That's the rules of evidence. So they must turn it over. Mike, I just want to do a quick commercial. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. Also, if you want to contribute to us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels, and we have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And you see the folks at the green font, our friends, our fans, our subscribers. They help support Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. Mike, I think that this case is obviously all the moves are being made by both prosecution and defense, and people don't like when the prosecution makes moves that they consider heavy-handed. And there's some people that don't know the criminal justice system and think that when they haven't turned over certain discovery yet, that's dirty pool. It's not dirty pool. It's a strategy, and they're following the rules, as I stated before. They have until the start of the trial to turn over all the discovery. I want to play a little bit more, Mike, of the court TV interview here.
Okay, so Shannon Gray's reaction there. Let me bring in my guest on the program this morning and talk a little bit more about this. In Silver Spring, Maryland, trial attorney Michelle Thomas, and in Washington, D.C., trial attorney and the host of the podcast Mom Life and Law, Megan Whiteside. Good morning to you, ladies. Thanks for being on the show this Monday morning. Okay, first, let me get your quick reactions to what Kohberger's defense team is doing, saying, wait a minute, we're just supposed to accept the state's evidence. Why isn't there DNA anywhere else in the car, in the home, in his office, yada, yada, yada. Michelle Thomas, what do you think about what the defense is saying here, please?
Yeah, good morning, Julie. Good to be with you. So they're doing their job. I mean, yes, they have to make the argument and push back at every possible turn, including DNA evidence. However, the argument is pretty baseless, and I expect it to go nowhere. DNA evidence on the knife sheath is certainly at the crux of the case in terms of linking this defendant to the crime. And so to expect to have that excluded or somehow allege that there's prejudice to the defendant is just really, really a stretch, Julie.
I appreciate it, Michelle. Megan Whiteside, same question to you. Your initial reaction hearing what the defense team is saying, please.
The defense is grasping at straws here because this is going to be the most compelling evidence, I imagine, to a jury in this trial. And what we can expect is that the state is going to argue that this goes to weight and not admissibility. That's a fancy way of saying the defense can attack this evidence through cross-examination of the DNA expert, by bringing their own DNA expert, but really the arguments they're making are not arguments that should persuade a judge to throw this evidence out.
Appreciate it, Megan. I'm just thinking to myself as I hear this, as you ladies so well said, yes, the defense team has to make these arguments. Yes, their concern is representing him, and depending on what the state moves for in terms of seeking the death penalty, this might become a case where they're working to just save his life. We'll see. So they've got to do all this, or else they're going to be ineffective. You ladies know there's something called ineffective assistance of counsel. These claims can be made if you don't. Make sure you leave no stone unturned, so to speak. And so they've got to attack it. However, when you think about it, and just logically, I'm not even talking as a lawyer. It's like, is Brian Kohberger the unluckiest guy in the whole world that, his car is seen at their house 12 times? There's messages sent via DM to some of these victims. He's wearing gloves when he's back at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. His DNA happens to be on the sheath at the crime scene between Maddie and Kaylee's bodies. Is he that unlucky? Did somebody take his knife sheath and just decide to drop it there to try to implicate him? Come on. Okay, and let's look at
Mike, there's someone actually agrees with us.
Thankfully.
They're saying the same exact things that we're saying. And it's attorneys that, obviously on court TV. But when the evidence is presented that way, and of course the defense is going to argue that this evidence doesn't mean anything. It could have been planted there, and touch DNA can last for, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but could last for months. Its comes from skin cells. And I guaranteed, if this case does reach the trial, does go to a trial, and we still don't know if it in fact is going to go to trial, and people may ask, well, what is he talking about? Well, there could be something called a plea bargain, but I don't think the families, I don't think the prosecutor, the defense may jump at it, so it's not out of the realm of possibility that it could happen. But look, there was remember the Jennifer Levin case with Robert Chambers? Yes. Mm-hmm. During that trial, it was Robert Chambers. He was known as the preppy murderer.
Yes.
And Jennifer Levin was I think they were like, I don't know, maybe 18 years old, if that.
Yeah.
17, 18. No, he was older, so he's maybe 18 to 20. Anyway, during the trial for that case, both the defense and the prosecution, almost right before it went to the jury, each side was terrified that the defense was afraid that Robert Chambers was going to get convicted of murder, second degree, and the prosecution were afraid that he was going to get off. So behind the scenes, they cut a deal and they had him plead to manslaughter first degree during the trial.
Right.
Which I don't think that happens that often, right, Mike?
No, it's because that's a real stare down. I mean, you're just going eyeball to eyeball like some old Sergio Leone movie. Who's going to weaken first? Who's going to go for it first? And by the time you get to the trial and the defense picks the jury, if they're pretty comfortable, they'll go with the trial. If the jury that's been impaneled is a terrible jury for the defense, they might quickly try to look for that deal. Oh, by the way, Mr. Prosecutor, Ms. Prosecutor, remember that deal we were talking about 30 days ago? Can I still take it? But to go right before, I remember that case now. Yeah. The preppy killer, right before the jury went out, or while they were actually in deliberation. It was really right at the very end. It was an amazing case. That doesn't happen too often. Not at all.
No, so I'm just saying that was sort of like, I'm sure the family of Jennifer Levin wanted that case taken to the finality and see him get convicted of murder second degree. But at the same time, the prosecution was afraid that he was going to get off totally.
That's right.
The defense he had was called rough sex.
Yeah.
And that was like one of the first times he had an attorney. His name was Jack Littman. And he was an extremely high-priced attorney. And he came up with this defense that he strangled her during rough sex.
That's right, around the neck, yes.
Yes. And the defense, the jury seemed to be buying it. And the prosecution was terrified that he was going to get off scot-free as like an accidental death during, and that's why the plea arrangement was made. If there was any justice in that case, was that Robert Chambers was a real dirtbag, and he went to prison, and he did the full 15 years of 5 to 15. And when he got out, he got arrested for an A1 drug felony. He's basically in prison for the rest of his life now.
Good.
So he really,
Very
karma.
beloved.
We call that karma in the police business.
Right.
One of the things, Mike. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Mike.
No. I just want to address really quickly what one of the ladies said on that previous podcast there. She talked about the knife sheath being admitted as evidence and talking about the weight of the evidence, not really the admissibility. And I just want to clear that up really quick for people, is that the knife sheath was found at the crime scene during the initial processing of the crime scene. Now, anything and everything found at that crime scene, so long as it was taken in accordance with the Fourth Amendment, which means that did the owner of that property, allow it, or did a judge allow it? And so long as you have the judge's permission, judge's search warrant application signed off on, or the owner of the property says okay, then there's no way in hell that sheath will not be admissible. It will absolutely be admissible. That then leaves the defense only to argue how accurate is that touch DNA? Was it processed properly? And that's a very different issue as to whether or not is it going to be is that knife sheath actually going to be brought into court and shown to the jury? So I just want to clear that up.
No, I think that was very important. One of the things that everyone's already talking about, again, of course, all of us are anticipating a trial. Now, one of the most important expert witnesses in this case is a DNA expert. And I would imagine the prosecution and maybe even the defense have already contacted CC Moore, because she is the #1 expert probably in the country in regards to, now they're referring to it as IGG. I don't like them referring to it as that. It sounds like some vocational school, and it stands for investigative genetic genealogy. I think we can say that. We don't have to say IGG. It's really, right. Let's not take a shortcut to that, because it's difficult to understand for everyone as it is. However, CC Moore and I'm going to play a little bit of her appearance 5 months ago on CNN, and she explains investigative genetic genealogy in layman's terms. It makes it almost so anyone can understand it, even though it's very sophisticated, it's very complicated. There's all kinds of little letters like PCR, STR, SNP is now called, and single nucleotide polymorphism. Wow, I went to college once, I could say that, but all of these things, and then put them together, and how does it work? I'm going to play a little bit. I've played this on other shows because this was 5 months ago, but it's still apropos and so important today. And as I said, I think CC Moore will probably be the #1 witness on this case. And whoever gets her first, is it going to be the prosecution or the defense?
Parking lot. The owner's driver's license information and photograph were consistent with a surviving roommate's description of the masked suspect's height and build and bushy eyebrows. Additionally, 5 days after the murders, the suspect had obtained a new license plate for his car. The car was located at the suspect's family residence in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. CNN has reported he was under surveillance, and he was seen cleaning his car inside and out using surgical gloves and depositing trash in the wee hours in a neighbor's garbage can. On December 27, Pennsylvania law enforcement discovered that trash and sent it to the Idaho State Lab for DNA testing. The very next day, the lab was able to match a DNA profile obtained from the trash as all but assured as being from the biological father to a person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath. As the document states, at least 99.9998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. Joining me now is CC Moore, head of genetic genealogy services for Parabon Nanolabs Law Enforcement Unit, which has made more than 200 successful identifications of violent criminals. She's not worked the Idaho case. She stars in the documentary series The Genetic Detective, now streaming on ABC, and she is also has worked on all 10 seasons of the PBS television documentary series Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr. Cece, thank you for being here. What does this mean? Single source of male DNA, which I'm reading from the affidavit.
It means there were no other DNA detected on that, meaning sometimes you can have a mixture. You can have multiple people's DNA. You want to have single source DNA if at all possible, because that really just ties that one person to that item. Now, it was likely that this was touch DNA. Certainly it's possible there was blood. They didn't tell us what type of DNA, but most likely it was touch DNA. And that would typically be just a few skin cells. This might have been a very small amount of DNA, but because of today's technological advances, we can detect even the tiniest bit of DNA.
How reliable is touch DNA if it is skin cells in comparison to, say, blood?
It's a great question. It is more transferable. So of course you would like to have blood, you would like to have semen or saliva, and they might. You know, they haven't shown all their cards. We don't know all that they have. But touch DNA, now that we can use it because of the sensitivity of our equipment, it also means you have to be more cautious about using DNA as your only evidence. So it's a really positive thing that they clearly have other evidence. This is just one piece of it. We have seen DNA, touch DNA transfer in other cases. Of course.
So, Mike, that's where the defense is going. She's right out of CeCe Moore's mouth. We have seen touch DNA transfer in other cases. Now, where is the defense attorney going to go with that information?
You know, Billy, they're going to have the only thing they can go. I mean, it's good because you can create some doubt, but that they'll have to say somewhere along the line they got some of, you know, Kohberger's DNA from someplace else, and it transferred onto the knife, maybe during the handling in a laboratory at the ME's office or something like that, where there was two pieces of evidence and it was on some other evidence, and it got onto a detective's or medical doctor's gloved hand, and then they touched the knife sheath when they went to analyze it, and then lo and behold, you know, before there was absolutely no DNA on the evidence, and right now, as we look under a microscope and we start processing it, we see evidence that belongs to Kohberger. So I think that's where they would go with that. But again, as you pointed out, you still have a tremendous case without it, and you also have, you know, the blood and any kind of skin cells that might be under the victim's hands, fingernails.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely,
you know, you could attack one piece of evidence, you can, but it doesn't mean that it's not reliable in terms of what it actually means. As as the lady said before, to the weight of the evidence, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to talk about all of the other evidence that they have. But it gives the defense attorney a runway to go at the prosecution. And with it goes the innuendo that they were sloppy in their protocols.
Absolutely.
And, you know,
let's play a little bit more of CeCe Moore here.
Of course, it's fairly rare, but it is something that you have to be aware of and make sure that there are other aspects of the case also pointing at the same person.
CeCe, good news, I guess. It's hard to commit murder without leaving something behind.
That's right. Yeah, I've been saying this for weeks. That type of violent, intimate crime, it is virtually impossible not to leave something behind, even if you are a criminology PhD student. So I am not at all surprised they were able to find something. Even if he tried hard not to leave something, you still would. And that is great news, because what it means is that anyone who perpetrates this type of crime in the future should be aware that they will be identified. They will be caught. there really is no reason that we should see serial killer, serial rapist moving forward. This guy, potentially could have become a Ted Bundy or even a Zodiac, not identified 50 years later. But because of the DNA technology, the advances that we're seeing, both in investigative genetic genealogy and the ability to use tiny amounts of DNA, we can identify someone, whether they are in the law enforcement database or not.
Cece, the cases that you have cracked, for which you have become famous, are the cases that necessitate you putting together, in connection with a private lab, a very complicated family history, family tree, and tracing back cousins and generations. That doesn't seem to be what took place here.
Well, I don't think we can reach that conclusion yet. Investigative genetic genealogy is simply a tip. It's a lead generator. It should never be used as evidence against a suspect.
Boom. That's probably one of the most important things that she said. And so important because it should never be used as evidence against the suspect, but a lead generator.
That's right.
So in this instance, the lead generator, they had the DNA matched to Brian Kohberger's father, which was 99.98888 that it was the person who did this. His DNA isn't, it wasn't a total match as Brian Kohberger's was. So that was the lead generated through building of this family tree. And again, there's another issue there because the defense is questioning the FBI did this investigative genetic genealogy. And this, I believe, was after the DNA was matched to the sheaf based on taking the garbage from the Pennsylvania home and matching the DNA on the sheath to the garbage, which was the DNA belonged to Brian Kohberger's father. So that would lead generators. Then the FBI built this family tree based on the investigative genetic genealogy. And that family tree that they built, according to the prosecutor, has over 1,000 people, potential family members and descendants of the Kohberger clan going back, I don't know how many years. So that is one of the reasons that the prosecution is fighting the discovery for that, because of they're trying to protect the people in that family tree from having their privacy interrupted through giving it out to the defense.
Yeah, there's if you can go back generations, and if you constructed a family tree, there might be people living across the nation who are genetically related to you. Maybe they're third cousins, and you might have never met them. You don't know their names. You have no idea who they are, and then suddenly you find out that one of them, through genetics, is a homicide suspect. The association itself is a tip. It's not evidence of guilt, but it helps get you as an investigator to say, okay, well, if that is true, what else comes from that, and what can I develop from that? But it itself is not a piece of evidence that proves guilt or innocence, but it gives the investigators the tip to move forward. And it confirmed, what information that they already had. So it's a great thing. And I think that what Cece Moore said was fabulous, and she explains very difficult concepts very quick, very easily, succinctly. But the transferability issue that she brought up, I think, is going to be something that the defense will. If I'm the defense, that's where I'm going to consider that possibly, theoretically, a chink in the armor. Not that it happened, but I'm going to be harping on that as best I could. You never know. You might win a point with the jury somewhere.
Absolutely. Kenzie Cush, has there ever been a situation such as this regarding genealogy? Kenzie Cush, I don't know. I would imagine, yes, it's a relatively new technology. There's something known as familial DNA, and a lot of jurisdictions won't allow it because this science of investigative genetic genealogy is somewhat new, and the law has not yet caught up to it yet. We're
Yeah.
still dealing with CODIS, which, CODIS soon will be obsolete, in my opinion. And if you don't know what CODIS is, it stands for, it's run by the FBI. It stands for the Combined DNA Index System. And it's DNA of convicted felons and certain misdemeanors. They have their DNA taken, and that forms the FBI CODIS system. But if in an instance like this, the suspect has never been arrested before, guess what? His DNA is not going to be in CODIS. But investigative genetic genealogy, it's so much more complicated, probably beyond my pay grade
Right.
to explain. But I understand it in a way that the technology that they use for investigative genetic genealogy is called SNPs, SNP, and it stands for single nucleotide polymorphism. And the one thing I understand about that is that there's over 1 million markers to that. So 1 million possibilities as compared to STR, and STR, I'll tell you what that stands for, short tandem repeats. And that's how the FBI does the test with the CODIS system, short tandem repeats, which only has 20 markers. So if you're trying to identify DNA, what would you rather have, 20 markers or over 1 million markers? I think the answer is pretty simple.
Yeah.
Kenzie Cush, I hope I answered your question through not answering it, but
No, that's a great question.
yeah, it is a great question. And I don't know if even, I would imagine CC Moore would know the answer to that, but I certainly don't.
There was a very interesting case here I'm in New York, in Philadelphia, nearby. The boy in the box. It was a very famous case about a boy's body that was left along the side of the road in a box outside of Philadelphia in a little suburb, and they had no idea who this kid was. And over the years, generations of detectives have tried to solve the case. Well, the poor boy, he's been in a grave for 45 years, but they had a blanket, and it was still somewhere in a storage facility in the police department, and they through genetic genealogy they found out who the boy's family was, and they've and then going back saying, okay, who would possibly in the family tree be related to this boy in terms of a parent or a brother. And unfortunately, they've talked to a number of the family members that are surviving, but the suspects that they believe might have actually killed this child, they passed away, like 15, 20, 30 years ago. But it is a powerful and amazing tool whereby you're getting homicide detectives, you're getting, and you're getting investigative genealogists putting together a family tree of someone who's passed away. It's brand new. It's really cutting edge stuff. It's fabulous.
Mike, there was a case in the 3-4 precinct years ago, and they found a little girl, 2 or 3 years old, in a cooler off the West Side Highway in that Fort Tryon Park, I believe it is.
Yeah.
And for years and years and years, they couldn't solve the case, and they called the 3-4 precinct detectives and the 3-4 precinct cops actually put their money together to give this baby a proper burial, and they named her Baby Hope because they couldn't ID her. Just within the last couple of years, same way you just described, they found they had some kind of tip of who the family was, or they connected it to investigative genetic genealogy, and they were able to arrest the uncle who had murdered, and this poor kid had to have had a horrific life in her short life, but they made an arrest after like 30 years on that case in regards to investigative genetic genealogy. So I just saw some other folks in the chat talking. Yes, is this used to overturn convictions also? Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. It can be used. It's being used by the Innocence Project.
Yes.
It's being used to exonerate people that are innocent. So it's as well as it's used for convictions and to put bad guys away, it's also used to exonerate the not guilty. Let me just finish up with CC Moore. I find what she says to be just fascinating.
And so it is proper that it would have been left out of the affidavit, in my opinion, because it should not form the basis of an arrest warrant. And so even though they didn't put it in there, I don't think we can rule it out. We don't know whether it was what initially identified him as a person of interest, and then they looked more closely at that tip about the car, or it could have gone the other way, where they identified him through that tip about the car, and at the same time they were working on the genetic genealogy and may have built his family tree to see if it was consistent with what they were seeing. I have done that in some cases. If there are persons of interest, you can very quickly rule them out or potentially not be able to exclude them, which is what would have happened in this case. Maybe they could have connected him to one or more of those matches, maybe a second, third, fourth cousin, and said, look, this is somebody who is a strong person of interest. So I think there's still a lot for us to learn on what happened here. I do think it is highly likely that an advanced private outside lab was used, at least somehow in this case. We've all been hearing whispers of this. There's been lots of leaks that investigative genetic genealogy was used. So I do think that they were at least trying to, or in the process of doing so.
And you make a great point. They of course don't have to put in this affidavit of probable cause. They, the prosecutors, all that they have. CC Moore.
Fascinating, amazing, and CC Moore is definitely the authority on this. I think there's other great genetic genealogists throughout the country. That lab, Othrem, OTHRAM, I believe they're the lab that did the DNA testing in this case.
Yes,
we had a kid on our show a while ago. His name is Eric Schubert, and the kid's amazing. He started doing genetic genealogy when he was 13 years old. And not only do you have to, and he's 22 now, I believe he just graduated college, and one of these labs, boom, they scooped him up immediately. Because not only do you have to be good at the science of investigative, but you have to be a whiz. I mean, a whiz on the computer. Because to build these, a lot of it is investigation. But that's why it's called investigative genetic genealogy. It's not just the science part. There's the gumshoe part, if you will. Right. The investigative part, and again, Eric Schubert, and I'll drop his name and I'll tell him I did, because the kid's amazing. I tried to get him back on the show. Now he's a celebrity. He won't come on the show anymore. But great kid, and he's not a kid anymore. He's 21, 22 years old, just graduated college. But this science is incredible, and if it's going to help people, you heard CC Moore say, we're not going to see any more serial killers. We're not going to see any more serial rapists. You know why? Because they're going to get caught very early on before they become serial, right? Although we know that a serial is two or more. So they may get to that point, but you're not going to see the Ted Bundys. You're not going to see people, the Night Stalkers. You're not going to see that anymore because they're going to get caught early on in their savage criminal career.
Yeah, Billy, the wonderful thing about this is, we're talking about investigative genetic genealogy in terms of, using it to help develop clues as to who killed someone in this kind of Idaho case. But as you pointed out, this could be used to exonerate someone. And the Innocence Project that has been around for a decade now, at least, they do fabulous work with the DNA, and God bless them for what they do to get innocent people out of prison. So it is a great tool for law enforcement, but it's a great tool for the entire criminal justice system because it works it can possibly exonerate people who should not be convicted of a crime. And that's, as a police officer, as a detective, it's the last thing you want to do is to put an innocent person behind bars. Absolutely not. We are as determined as anyone else to make sure that no innocent person ever spends a day in prison. Absolutely not under any circumstances.
100%, Mike. Folks, if you're looking for a great defense attorney in the New York metropolitan area, Joe Murray is your man. Joe Murray is a retired member of the service, a 15-year veteran of the NYPD, turned attorney. You can get a hold of Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. You can email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. He's got a website, jmurray-law.com. Joe Murray is a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and we highly recommend Joe Murray as a defense attorney. You know, Mike, it's like we could talk about this case all night long because there's going to be so many different twists and turns in this. And I think when you hear or you read or you see on even YouTube, people talking about that, you know, oh, someone else did this crime, you know, no, that's not what happened. Someone else did not do this crime. They have the right guy. They absolutely have the right guy. Now, of course, they have to prove it. They have to prove that he's the right guy. And will they prove he's the right guy? Well, we'll see, you know, but I believe they absolutely have the right guy. And when it bothers me when I hear people say, oh, you know, it's a Colombian drug hit, like, oh my God, you know, what are your credentials to having a YouTube channel? Because you just made that up, you know, and it really is bothersome.
Yeah, Billy, it just calls into question the competency of the Moscow police, the Idaho State Police, the FBI, their common sense, their technical expertise. You know, it calls into question the technology, that cell phone technology, pinpointing them, cell camera technology, DNA. It calls into question all the technology and asks you to throw it all out and say, no, it's got to be like the Colombian drug cartel swooped in like ninjas, did this job, dropped off Brian Kohberger's DNA. Somehow they got it. They put it on a knife sheath and they took off without being seen. Come on. You know, it stretches the imagination to the point of ridiculousness. And it just takes away from the actual the competency of the FBI and the Idaho State Police, the Moscow State Police. If anybody doubts the competency of a homicide detective, especially like the state police, I'm not talking about Idaho because the Moscow case, because they've only had one in a long period of time, but they immediately got the help. People who do homicide investigations as detectives, they know what they're doing. They absolutely have seen this before. They might not have seen a 4-body homicide, but they've seen many homicides. They know how these cases work. They've got the expertise. They've got the training. They've got the experience. They got the technological know-how behind them. They know what time it is. And so when anybody ever says, oh, it's the Colombian drug cartel, you know, that's sad that people actually even say it, let alone have somebody believe it.
100%. I just want to play a little bit of Law and Crime. And this is the Gonsalves's attorney talking about the potential of the death penalty in this case.
That they will pursue the death penalty against Brian Kohberger.
Well, I mean, I think that was expected. I think it's a relief to the families. You know, it's up to the prosecutor to decide whether or not they're going to pursue the death penalty. The victims' families, you know, hopefully have some input, but ultimately it's their decision. And, you know, that we met with the prosecutor, and I think they met with the Mogan family and the Carnoodle family, and I'm sure they had conversations with the Chapin family on the case. And so I think it's more of a relief more than anything. So
how did the meeting with the prosecutor go?
You know, it was fine. I mean, we just kind of listened, and you know, I think like Christy and Steve and Olivia and the family is, you know, the question really was posed, you know, if you're not going to pursue the death penalty on a case like this, what kind of case would you ever pursue the death penalty on? So I think that was a good question for them, and ultimately they are pursuing the death penalty. So
the Gonsalves family has been the most vocal of all of the victims' families in this case. Gray says the Gonsalveses are looking forward as that October trial date nears. They're taking comfort in their other children and a new addition to the family. They do have the grandchild now. I saw that, you know, obviously I think everybody's seen that Olivia had the baby. The baby was in court for the arraignment and everything like that. That has to provide some measure of comfort, I think, to Steve and Christy.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they have their other children, obviously. You know, Kaylee was a big part of their lives, a big part of the whole family's lives, and there's, you know, that can never be replaced in any way or shape or form. But you know, the support of the family, they're a tight family. They're good. You know, they balance each other out. I love them to death, and I mean, I think they'll always be a part of my life moving forward. you go through the fire with people, and it bonds you in ways that you sometimes don't even understand. So,
as the families grieve, there is one thing that is making that process a little more difficult. The University of Idaho now owns the home where Maddie, Kaylee, Ethan, and Xana were murdered last November. The school plans to move forward with raising the house. Gray says 3 of the families want it preserved until after the trial, despite the prosecution and the defense telling the court they approved of the crime scene being released.
we have made it very clear to the University of Idaho that we do not want that house to be demolished, and they are ignoring us completely. And when I say ignoring us, I mean that they respond and they say, okay, yeah, we understand what you're saying, but basically tough cookie. We're going to go ahead forward with it because they say that it's for the good of the community and good for the University of Idaho, but it's not. It's not the good for the community or the University of Idaho. It may be good for the University of Idaho for everyone to hurry up and forget that there was a murder that occurred right off campus, but it's not for the victims' families. And that's a massive piece of evidence. And we've stressed to them over and over about the Carnudo family, the Mogan family, and the Gonzalez family do not want that house to be demolished. And they're moving forward anyway. They just don't really care. It's always been a little bit of a hurry up and grieve. We need to move on as the University of Idaho. So, I think it's frustrating. I think that I know that the prosecution and the defense have released and the court has released the home to the University of Idaho because neither party has made any objection to the demolition of the home.
The home was processed by Idaho State Police and held for many months. It's been under guard 24 hours a day since the morning of the murders. At one point, it was going to be released to the property owners, but the court halted that process at the request of the defense. The families are concerned it could still be needed for trial.
Mike, we could do a whole show on that. And I'm really so against them demolishing that home before the trial. What is the rush? There's nothing like a juror going inside, or the 12 jurors going inside that home and feeling the vibe, feeling the aura of that house, feeling what happened in that house. And if they knock it down, there's no possibility. I don't care if they have video evidence, they got pictures, they got laser measurements. None of that is the same as physically being in the location where these murders occurred.
That's right, Billy. Exactly the tactile feel of walking through the hallways, looking into the bedrooms, going there and just trying to figure out in their minds, okay, what was a sequence of events? It's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to hear testimony, but it's another thing to actually see, okay, there's, 10 steps from this floor to that floor. The first bedroom is right off over here. It's 2 feet over here. The other bedroom is directly below it. Is it possible for somebody to actually walk through downstairs, go out and go back up? Is that all possible? And the only way you could really feel it is to actually be there and just actually do a walk yourself. I think it's a fabulous piece of evidence that is absolutely needed. I don't care if the defense raises no objections now. They may later on. It'll be too late. You don't want to give them any sort of something to pound the table and say it was destroyed and they didn't get another chance to look it over. Absolutely not. The Idaho wants it because they do want people to. Mr. Gray's absolutely correct. They want people to get past it, but it's been since last November. It's 8 months now, 9 months now. Another 9 months isn't going to hurt anybody. The moment the case is over, they could take a wrecking ball to it, but not until then. Absolutely not under any circumstance should that be touched.
Mike, just to give our listeners a perspective, when I was a sergeant in homicide, Manhattan North Homicide, whenever my team had a homicide, I made sure I went into that crime scene. I walked the crime scene. I walked through the blood. I looked at the evidence. I looked at the body. I experienced all those things because did I have to do that? No, I didn't have to do that, but I wanted to feel this case. I wanted to feel what it was like. And in a large way, that's what the jurors would be doing. And I think it's irresponsible for the Idaho University, who now own that house, to knock it down. And I definitely think it's all about dead presidents on green pieces of paper. If you're not from New York, that's money, you know?
That's right.
That's what it's all about, because they don't want it. The house is an eyesore. The house is a reminder to all students, new, old, and prospective students, of what occurred at that location. But guess what? As Mike Geary said, you can wait another 8 or 9 months. Wait till this trial's over. This trial's important. And if that piece of evidence is what pushes it over the top and gets a conviction, so be it. But don't knock it down. In fact, I just want to make one other point. There's a petition online now for them not to do it. I'm sure they're going to do what they want to do anyway.
Sure.
But just to show that there is some pushback to this, it's a horrible situation. You know, Mike, I just want to thank you again for coming on tonight with zero notice on this holiday weekend. And
No problem.
I think we had a great discussion. And it's not just, people. Kenzie Cush, thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. Blessings from Liverpool. Isn't that where the Beatles came from?
That's right.
That's where the 4 lads from Liverpool came from. Well, thank you so much, Kenzie, and thank you for participating in our chat. And folks, and thank you all the people that tuned in tonight. Thank you for taking time. I know some people are across the pond, and I don't even know what time it is over there, but I see a lot of you guys are in the chat, and I really appreciate you guys coming by, of course, especially on this holiday weekend. Heather, whatever, good to see you. Schmitty, Lieutenant Pete, Harlem Raiders, thank you.
Yes.
You're, of course, one of our biggest fans, our biggest supporters, and we appreciate that. Karen, Legal Minded Friends, Corrine, Dima, thank you, Guy. Thank you, Okie Dokie. Some great questions, Okie Dokie 7. And guys, just so you know, we try to get to the chat, but we can't get to everyone. And so I try to, read questions from there here and there, but I can't read every single question. But thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you for watching on this holiday weekend. Mike, your final thoughts.
I think people should just realize that the competency of homicide detectives, crime scene analysts, would amaze the average layperson. And the idea that the Colombian drug cartels did this, no. You could trust the homicide detectives, the crime scene people in the medical examiner's office. Trust the DNA on this case, and don't listen to any kind of silly conspiracy theories whatsoever, and just have patience.
And I think you also have to realize, and I'll echo what Mike just said, there was a triumvirate of law enforcement on this case: the Moscow police, the Idaho State Police, and the FBI. And so I think, and then of course in the prosecution is Bill Thompson, who's the prosecutor from Latah County, and the Idaho State Attorney General's office lent 2 state attorney generals to this case. So there's going to be a very competent prosecution. They're not going to make any mistakes legally, and this case is moving forward. Again, folks, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Have a great weekend, and God bless.
Take care, everybody.
One episode just ain't enough.